This is Radio Free Flint. You're listening to Arthur Bush. Today I have former Public Safety Chief at Bishop Airport, Christopher Miller. Welcome, Chief. It is very good to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're a Flint native. You grew up in the area. Tell us about your background.
I'm a product of General Motors parents. Both my parents worked many years for General Motors. I grew up on the north end of Flint. My dad worked for Chevrolet, and my mom worked for Fisher Body, the old Turnstead. I went to Flint Public Schools, attended Jefferson Elementary School, as well as Bryant Junior High and Flint Northwestern, and Mott Community College and Oakland Community College. I ended up leaning more toward music, and I became a musician in the Flint area before I started my law enforcement career. So started out playing upright bass in the orchestra at Northwestern. I learned how to play bass guitar, and I ended up having a high school band, if you will. I played at all the high schools, Flint Northwestern, Northern, Southwestern. I don't think we ever played over at Central, but I know we did some of the other area schools, where they had dances for the young teenagers. That was fun, and that's what I did early on before long.
But something significant happened in your career in 2017 that sort of rocked the community, and you were right center of it.
Absolutely. In June 2017, a gentleman by the name of, I shouldn't call him a gentleman.
I'm sorry, we don't need to mention his name. He's had enough publicity.
Yeah, I use that term loosely. This person walked into the airport about 8:40 a.m. He viciously attacked Lieutenant Neville. The attack was to the magnitude that it almost cost Lieutenant Neville his life. And thank God the people at Hurley Medical Center did one hell of a job taking care of him. But not only that, the responding medics that came to his aid within our department, our guys, and then the Genesee County Sheriff's Department medics and the ambulance. But I tell you, the agencies that were involved transporting him, I'm talking about the police agencies that shut down every light between Bishop Airport and Hurley Medical Center to make sure that transport got to the hospital as fast as possible.
Let's step back for just a second. You were at work and you were on the second level of the airport. There was some kind of commotion. Tell us what you saw and what you did.
Well, at the time of the attack, on the day of the attack, we were planning to do some training, and the training had to do with contingency plans for anything that could or would happen at the airport, such as plane crash, fire, weather emergencies, anything like that. We had the FBI, the state police, sheriff's department, all the other law enforcement agencies, as well as fire agencies, fire department agencies, to come to the airport so we could have a roundtable and talk about these things and plan for things like this. We had a lot of help, needless to say, faster than we would normally have had, just because these people were already en route to the airport for a 9:00 meeting. Well, myself and Lieutenant Dan Owen, who was a fire lieutenant, we were in a conference room and we heard this commotion. We looked out the glass window and we could see there's a large glass window to this conference room. So we could see outside that Lieutenant Neville and one of the maintainers, Richard Krull, were fighting with an individual. And so Dan and I ran out to give aid, to help. By the time we got there, we were all going to the floor. I don't know why we're fighting with this guy, but obviously, he's trying to hurt us, because I see this large hunting knife, and then all of a sudden, I'm saying to myself, where's all this blood coming from? I didn't know if Jeff had been stabbed or if Rich Krull had been stabbed. All I know is just a lot of blood. So we're trying to get this guy handcuffed. I get my handcuffs out. We get him handcuffed, with the help of the other individuals, including Jeff. I get my handcuffs on him, and we pat him down and make sure he doesn't have any other weapons or whatever. And we take him down to lockup in the airport lockup. Basically,
he attacked Jeff Neville, the lieutenant.
I come to find out just a few minutes later, because as soon as we took him downstairs, they got him in the lockup, I came back upstairs because I knew somebody had got hurt. And I knew I had a crime scene and I had to lock that crime scene down. I get up there, I realize that Jeff has a devastating wound. We've got our EMTs coming to give aid. I think someone from one of the restaurant workers ran and got a big towel to put on him to help stop the bleeding. We had to lock the airport down. I gave orders to lock the airport down right away because I didn't know if this guy was by himself or if he had other people with him. I immediately recognized him to be an Arab of Arab descent. Now I'm flashing back to 9/11, some of the other things that have happened in the world. It was a difficult day, but we did what we needed to do to keep people safe.
I mean, you've been a police officer a long time at that point, and I assume having patrolled the streets of Mount Morris Township and some other places, you've encountered unruly people.
Absolutely.
How's this dude rank on the list of?
Yeah, he was pretty high up there because he seemed to be running on pure adrenaline. Although he wasn't a very large man in stature, he was very, very strong, very powerful. And it took a lot to hold him down and get him handcuffed. He fought to the end, till we actually had him restrained where he couldn't fight anymore.
The action by you and your fellow officers saved Jeff Neville's life.
Well,
and if you hadn't been there that quickly, this might not be the story it is.
Well, there's some truth to that, but the person who I really want to give the credit to is Richard Cruel. What Rich Cruel did that day was awesome. He stepped in. This is a person who has no police background, no training in hand-to-hand combat, and he had no weapons to defend himself with. He's the one that got between this assailant and Jeff and stopped him from injuring Jeff even further because he came from behind and he stabbed Jeff from behind.
Okay.
And as he went to stab him again, that is when Richard Cruel threw his arm up and prevented him from stabbing Jeff any further, giving Jeff enough time to react and fight for his life.
What was Rich's position with the airport?
He was a maintainer, a maintenance worker.
Eventually, this terrorist, he was a terrorist, let's make no mistake about this.
Yeah, I deemed him as a terrorist.
And his goal was essentially to come to the Flint airport to launch some kind of an attack on the airport.
Actually not. His goal was to come to a large airport. He did not, through investigation, as the FBI did their interrogation on him, talking to him and finding out why he did what he did, what his intent was, he divulged that he did not realize that the Bishop Airport was as small as it is. He thought he was coming to a major airport in Michigan. He actually Googled international airports in Michigan. And if you Google international airports in Michigan, Bishop, by virtue of alphabetical order, Bishop comes up first, or at least it did at that time. That is what he ended up getting was Bishop Airport, and he didn't realize that it was not the big Category X airport until he actually got there. But by the time he got there and saw what he saw, he says, well, he's not going to change his plans now. He just do it there.
Now, this guy came from Canada, as I recall.
That is correct. He came from Montreal, Canada, and his goal was to kill as many police officers, airport police officers, as he could before he would eventually be killed himself.
He wanted suicide by police, basically.
Absolutely. That is pretty much what he divulged to the FBI. He wanted to die, but he wanted to die a martyr, but he wanted to kill some police officers before he died.
While he was conducting this unprovoked attack on Officer Neville's, he was yelling and screaming, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Death to America. He said something about you had killed people in Pakistan and Afghanistan and said some other words. There was a Flint police captain who was walking in the door of the airport, the front door of the airport, when we were taking this guy down. And I told the captain, I said, this guy just attacked Lieutenant Neville. I need you to come with me because I'm going to need your help. And so she immediately followed us. We got this guy to the lockup, and I come to find out later that he actually spit, at her. His belief was that he was very appalled that we had turned him over to a female police officer. He did not recognize this woman as being someone that should be in charge of him or over him. And later on in the investigation, I found out that she was smart. She actually pulled out her cell phone and recorded all the things that he was saying while he was in lockup, things that he was saying to her, the same things that he was saying about, the USA. Some of those things, well, that recording was used in federal court to help convict him. So I was very grateful for her help. It all came together.
When you look at that airport and your training, obviously these things go on in other places, but you must have been stunned to see this happen in your hometown in Flint.
Well, every year, let me just back up and say this. Being a public safety chief at an airport, early on, I joined an organization called ALEAN. ALEAN stands for Airport Law Enforcement Agencies Network. And that is a group of police chiefs and commanders from all over the country: New York, New Jersey, Chicago, LA, Seattle, you name it, and small airports, Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia. Savannah is not much bigger than our airport. It doesn't matter how large or how small the airport is. If you have general aviation security, if you have aviation at your airport, commercial aviation, that's the word I'm looking for. If you have commercial aviation at your airport, you're in charge of people getting on aircraft, traveling from point A to point B and back to point A, and you want to keep those people as safe as possible. So in this organization, we get together, we talk about how to do that, because it can happen at any airport. I met a good friend of mine. He was the chief at LAX, and he told me, he pulled me off to the side. He says, Chris, the thing you need to remember is that it doesn't matter how large or how small you are. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. It can happen. He says, just because you're from a small airport doesn't mean it can't happen to you. And he told me about that. I mean, he made that statement to me just a few years before we got attacked in 2017, because LAX had been attacked. They had an active shooter at LAX where a TSA agent had been killed. And so he told me, he says, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Obviously, that's an experience that's indelibly written in your minds and those of many of you. Worked at the airport for 10 years, and the airport at that time had gone through a lot of changes in the 90s. It had become essentially a brand new airport. It was rebuilt. There was a lot of support for it in the community. That airport then met with not just physical changes, but some major changes in 2000. Tell us the story of how you got to be the public safety chief at Bishop Airport.
Yes. Well, like I said, I started there in 1989. Jim Rice, who was the director at the airport, decided to put out a search for a new chief. And I came to work on third shift one night, and one of the guys who I had known quite a while, he said to me, he says, did you see this? And it was a posting for the position. And I said, no, I hadn't seen that. He said, you should put in for this. And I looked at him, I says, why me? And he says, because I can work for you. He says, you've always been a good leader. I can work for you. We can work for you. That inspired me. I went home and told my wife about it, and she said, absolutely, let's put together a resume. And we did. And I want to say they had about 29 applicants, including myself, for the position. And I ended up coming out number one. That is how I became the public safety chief. And at the time, I was an EMT. I was a certified police officer, but I was not a firefighter. I didn't know a whole lot about firefighting. So immediately, I threw myself into learning what firefighters do and what that was all about.
Now, in 2000, something pretty significant happened. Well, 9/11 happened. And
you want to talk about 2001. Yeah, in 2001. A little more than a year after I became the chief, 9/11 hit. And boy, was that a day. I don't think there's any American that can say they didn't know where they were or what they were doing when they found out about those towers getting struck and the country being attacked. I know what I was doing. I know exactly what I was doing. I know exactly where I was.
Where were you and what were you doing?
I was sitting at my desk doing paperwork. I was at the airport in my office doing paperwork, going over my dailies from the day before, the daily reports from the officers and just typical routine stuff. I got a phone call and it was from Jeff Neville, who later on became my lieutenant. Jeff Neville called me. He says, Chief, he says, you need to get to a television. I said, why? What's going on? He says, you need to get to a television right now. So I jump up out of my office and I step into the administrative office at the airport, just outside my office. And there's nobody in the administration. And I'm like, where's everybody at? And they're all in the conference room. And as soon as I walked in, that's when the second plane struck. The second aircraft struck the second tower.
In New York City.
In New York City. Everybody was trying to figure out what was going on. People were thinking that it was just an accident until the second aircraft hit. When the second aircraft hit, okay, this can't be just an accident. I don't think it was within 2 minutes later, my cell phone started jumping off the hook. And it was the federal government calling me and telling me, Chief, shut it down, shut the airport down, shut everything down. Nothing comes in, nothing goes out. Shut your airspace down, shut all aircraft down, go through your airport with a fine-tooth comb. We're sending people. It was less than 30 minutes. I want to say less than 20 minutes. The state police was right there at the airport. Grand Plank Township showed up. Flint City showed up. The sheriff's department was there. Burton PD. We had it all. We locked the airport down. We went through it with a fine-tooth comb. We went through all the aircraft that were on the ground to make sure that no incendiary devices or bombs, if you will, were already planted on any of our aircraft. We did everything to make that airport safe. We followed all the security measures that the federal government asked us to do.
Now, after that, there were quite a bit of changes in the way general aviation was pretty much shut down for a while. But once it got back to somewhat normal, if it was normal, there were a lot of changes that took place at the airport.
Absolutely. The first big change was that the FAA was no longer in charge of aviation security. The newly created Transportation Security Administration, or as people know it, TSA, they became the security entity governing all airports throughout the continental USA. We took our marching orders from them in reference to how we implemented the different security measures throughout the whole facility and the land, the property.
You adjusted to this new reality, which continued to this day, actually. What part of town did you grow up in?
The north end, between Pearson, just south of Pearson Road, okay. And I lived there my entire childhood. We were a steadfast family. We stayed there, and my family owned property there. I want to say my dad had 3 houses in a row right there. He had the one that we lived in, and then he had 2 rental houses next door.
What kind of neighborhood was it?
It was your typical General Motors family. Most of all the parents worked for General Motors, and we were probably the smallest family on the block because it was just 2 of us, my brother and I, but all the other kids that we grew up with had 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 kids to their family. Again, we were one of the smaller families in the neighborhood, but we were well known. We were stable in the community. I not only had my mom and dad as parents, but all of the families there were your parents, so to speak, because in my day, if you were up the street and you were cutting up and doing something you weren't supposed to, those families, the mother, father, whichever saw you doing wrong, doing something that you had no business doing, they would get after you. You get smacked on the butt, and then they take you home and tell your parents, and then you got it again. As I grew up with that mentality, that kept me, as I continued to, grow, it kept me out of trouble, because the first thing I thought about whenever I thought about doing something that I had no business doing, what would my dad say, or what would my mother say, what were they going to do to me if they found out?
Is that different today than it was then?
I think so. Now this is just my opinion, but I don't think that people have or parents have as much control over their kids as my parents, my generation did. Because again, if my dad caught one of my buddies from another family across the street or up the street or down the street, whatever, if they were doing something mischievous, if they saw you doing something you weren't supposed to be doing, they would say something and they would get after you. Nowadays, I don't think, parents communicate as well as they did back then.
Between one another, you mean?
Yeah, and everybody knew each other. All the families knew each other, and all the families they had a relationship.
You made your way into mock college, but before that, you took a spin as a musician.
Yes.
What kind of music were you playing?
Mostly R&B, but there was some times that we were called to play polka, and we were called to play country and western, because it all depends on the gig. To us, it didn't matter because we were true musicians and we could play anything.
Do you still play?
I don't know if you could see it in the background, but I have a bass guitar that I bought way back in 1976, and I still have that. I have a number of bass guitars. I still play and I sing a little bit. Right now, I'm currently not playing with any band or anything, but I have done that over the years. I made my living from 18 to, I want to say, 24 years old playing music. I had little odd jobs. At 18 years old, I worked for Hank Graft. When Hank Graft Ford was downtown, a lot of people may not remember that. And
I do, because they sponsored our baseball team. My first baseball team was Otto P. Graff.
I met Hank by playing music because Hank and his wife, Bonnie, they were involved with what they call junior achievement back then. They would have these parties and they would need live entertainment. And somebody told them about us. They came up on the north end to see us play, to see if we were actually good enough to do what they wanted us to do. And right on the spot, they hired us. We played parties for them for a couple of years, on and off. I remember there was a guy in Flint by the name of Jack Hurlick. He was owner of all the Hurlick's drugstores. Jack came to one of the parties. It was a black tie party, and we were in tuxedos and everything. And he walked up to us and he says, "You guys are really good." He says, "Oh my God." He says, where? He says, "Hank, where'd you get these guys from?"
His wife was well known in Flint as being a jazz aficionado, and she actually bought a building, the old pepper mill, and turned it into a jazz club.
Yeah. I think we even played a few jazz songs that night for her. I remember we played The Girl from Ipanema. That was an old jazz tune, and she wanted to hear us play, because we were playing, rock and roll and R&B and just music for people to dance to. Like you said, she was a jazz musician, or she loved jazz, and she wanted to hear something that night, and we accommodated her.
What was the name of the band?
The band was actually, it was a weird name, but it actually caught on. It was made up of all of our names. The leader of our band, his name was John McCowan. John, Chris, Chuck, Lindsay, and Bernard. We were JCCLB Movement. That name became infamous in the Black community in Flint. And even, before I got into law enforcement, I want to say in 1976, 75, 76, 77, we made really good money supporting ourselves as musicians. I would have a day job, but I made more money playing music than I did on my day job. And matter of fact, there was times when I would say, "Hey, I got enough of this daytime stuff. I'm doing music." As the 70s came to a close, the disco era kicked in, live entertainment began to die, and the DJ era became more prevalent.
About that time, you met somebody who was working in these joints where you were playing. Tell us about that person who was somebody that had a hell of an influence on your life.
Absolutely. We were doing gigs at the old IMA auditorium downtown Flint, the Bowlers Ball, the Cotillion Ball, things like that. and even some of the nightclubs that we played around in Flint. There was this guy that I used to always see him, and to come to find out he was a Flint police officer, and I'm like, okay, why is this guy always hanging out? Come to find out he's security. He was working security, and he was like doing what they call moonlighting, if you will. We got to know each other pretty good, and he would always come up to me and he'd say, Miller, when you come down to the police department? I'm like, huh? He says, when you come down to the police department, he says, you got to come join the police department. Come join with us. And I looked at him and I cocked my head to the side. I says, you must be nuts. I says, I have no aspiration of being a cop. And he says, man, I'm telling you, it's a great job. You know, you get to help people. Along with that, it's good pay, good benefits, and you'll have a retirement when it's all said and done. And all that sounded great, but is really not what I wanted to do. You know, I had it in my head, I wanted to be a rock star. Well, the good Lord had other plans for me. So, by the way, that officer's name was Levester Cross. God rest his soul. He's passed away now. He went on to work for Flint PD for well over 30 years. Much respected officer in this community. It wasn't very many people that didn't know Levester Crosland or Lee Crosland, as a lot of people called him. He finally talked me into it. By the time I got ready to join the Flint Police Department, that's when they had a big layoff, and I want to say 1980. You know, and I was going to school back and forth, you know, and I tried to join them, but again, they had this layoff. So he's the one that said, hey, the sheriff's department is hiring. I went over to the sheriff's department. They directed me to administration, I want to say personnel, over in the county administration building. And that is where I put in my application. I met a guy down there by the name of Captain Jack Spalding, who took a liking to me. And Jack Spalding said, he looked at his top lieutenant, I think his name was Dana Berry at that time. He looked at Dana and he says, I like this young man. And he says, if he's got no record, he's not, you know, hasn't been in any trouble or anything. He says, I want to get this guy hired. And that is how I got into the sheriff's department. Wow. And when I started, John O'Brien was the sheriff.
And then later you worked for Sheriff Joe. Sheriff Joe was.
Yes. John O'Brien stuck around for about another year after I hired in. And then he didn't run again. And Joe Wilson ran for sheriff and became the sheriff. And that is who I spent most of my career under Joe Wilson.
So it was 1982 when you started with the sheriff's department, right?
Yep. I retired in 2000. Yep.
So you worked the Township Police Department in Mount Morris, and that gig lasted quite a number of years as well, didn't it?
Just a few years. I think I worked there from 1986 to 1989.
And then you worked for Bishop Airport for a long time.
Right. I left Mount Morris Township to go work for Chief Mike Ahern at Bishop Airport. He had started a brand new police department there, and he asked me to come on, work part-time for him.
Let's switch gears here for a second while we've got a few minutes left. One of the things that I learned about you in preparing for this podcast was that you like Corvettes.
Absolutely. I am.
Where does that come from?
I've always liked cars.
Is that because you're from Flint?
Probably, you know, because some of the world's best cars came out of Flint, Michigan. For those who don't know, the Corvette was born in Flint, Michigan in 1953. It came out of what is now Truck and Bus over in Van Slyke. That's where the first Corvette was born. A year or two later, I don't know exactly when, but at some point, the manufacturing went down to Bowling Green.
That's Kentucky, not Ohio.
Yes. Yep. Yes, I am a big Corvette enthusiast. I own two of them. I own a 2004 convertible, and I own a 2017 C7 Grand Sport. I'm a part of a Corvette group. The name of my Corvette group is Corvettes of Distinction, or as we like to call it, the COD. And we have about 14 members with various cars ranging back to a 1989 all the way up to a 2021.
Played a role with this group is essentially its leader in Back to the Bricks and creating a Corvette reunion at one point.
Right. Well, I am the vice president of COD, but I'm also a member, along with my president, I'm a member of the Corvette reunion. I'm on the committee for the Corvette reunion with Gary Drago.
And Southwestern.
Right. Gary Drago is the president of the Corvette Reunion, and we are committee members.
I understand that there were quite a few Corvettes that went to the reunion.
Every year, we get an average of about 500 Corvettes downtown Flint.
You must be in heaven when you see all those Corvettes.
Oh my God, everything from a 53 all the way up to the latest model. And for those that don't know, Corvettes are done in generations. You have a C1, which represents the first generation Corvettes from 1953 to 1962. And then 63, which is one of the most expensive Corvettes you'll ever find, because if you find one of those in mint condition, the 63 is the only one that they made with the split window. That car is well over six figures if it is in mint condition. But then you go on all the way through the C1, C2, C3, and all the way up to what is called now the C8. That's the latest Corvette that body style was created in 2020.
You also have been involved in police community relations activities throughout your career. You're a sound, steady fella from the city who's done some amazing things in your career. I think you're qualified to tell us with some authority, what's your assessment of police community relations in Flint and Genesee County, or as I like to call it, the Flint area?
Are you asking as a relationship with the community itself, or the law enforcement agencies with one another?
No, they have to get along with each other. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the community and the police.
Well,
and what is the status of, what do you think the state of it is today? I mean, we see things on television, we read things in newspapers, we watch movies. What's real life out there today? I mean, what is it that you look at Flint with all of its issues? We seem to be a city that, although we have had some problems here and there between citizens and police, most of our problems seem to be worked out pretty well, looking at it objectively.
My opinion is that we have a dynamic sheriff in Chris Swanson, and we have a dynamic police chief in Terrence Green, both of whom I've worked with, I go way back with. For those of you who don't know, Terrence Green came from the Genesee County Sheriff's Department, and I remember Chris Swanson when he hired on as a young deputy and watched him rise within the Sheriff's Department. So I go way back with both of them. I know that they care about this community very much. They want to see the best for Flint and Genesee County. And I think that they're doing the best that they can with what they have to work with. The community, it's tough. I'm an African American. I understand both sides. I understand the fear that people have of the police, especially when you see things that happen to young African Americans, particularly males, and you see people being shot, and killed. And here's what I say. When I did it, I did my best to treat everyone with respect, because I feel like if I gave respect, I would get respect. And in most cases, I did. Every now and then you get that one idiot that there's just no way of doing it but to take this guy down. Once the handcuffs are on, it's over with. I never allowed anyone under my command or with me, whether it was a partner or whether I was the sergeant in control of the situation or in charge of the situation, I never believed in allowing my officers to do anything that I knew was wrong. I had a lieutenant tell me years ago, he says, when you're making a decision, if you think in terms of liability, 9 times out of 10, you'll never go wrong. But it even goes even further than that. Just being a human and treating people like humans, like human beings. When I saw what Derek Chauvin did to George Floyd, I was ashamed. It brought tears to my eyes because it didn't have to happen. You don't have to do things that way. And so I say to any young police officer or any veteran out there that may hear this, do it right. Do it the right way. Sure, we want to go home the same way we came to work. Absolutely. But we have a responsibility to do it the right way. I don't care if you're black, white, or polka dot. You have a responsibility to do it the right way. And when you do it the right way, then you can look at yourself in the mirror and look at anybody, and you can stand the red face test with anybody and say, hey, I did it the right way.
Let me ask you this question. You grew up in Flint. You lived there all your life. You've worked there in your career for 40 years or so. How would you describe Flint in one word or less?
Struggling.
And its people?
Struggling.
And a lot of people in Flint we had a group of young kids way back in 2000 that played for Michigan State University, and they became known as the Flintstones. And many people in Flint now have assumed that identity. In other words, they believe they're tough, they're resilient, and they don't give up. Would you call yourself a Flintstone?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That name grew out of some fine athletes and what they had achieved playing sports in this community. The majority of people, myself included, have adapted that slogan, if you will. I'm from Flint. Yeah, I'm a Flintstone. Absolutely. And I'm proud of it. I said a little while ago, or just a couple of minutes back, about the community struggling. It's not just Flint. There's a lot of places. There's a lot of Flints throughout the United States. But all I can say is the people of Flint are resilient. They won't give up. I'm proud to say that that's where I'm from.
Well, Chris Miller, I call you a hero, and I've known you a long time. And you have made everyone in law enforcement proud with your carrying out of your responsibilities over all those years. And I wish you the very best in your retirement. And I hope that you get to spend many years with your wife doing some fun stuff.
I'm going to do my best. Before we end this conversation, I want to give a quick shout out to that officer that talked me into going into law enforcement. That guy, again, I mentioned his name, Levester Crosland. He's the guy that talked me into this because I didn't see this for myself. Some years later, after he retired from the Flint City Police Department, he walked into my office around 2003, I think it was, 2003, maybe 2004. I'm going to say it's 2003. He walked in and he said, Chief, how you doing? And I says, Lee, I'm doing well. How you doing? I heard you retired from Flint City. He says, yep. He says, I'm all done. He says, but Chief, I'm bored to death. He says, you got anything out here for me? Just show you how God works, because I couldn't hire everybody. But I had a position that one guy had just vacated. I knew I had a position open, and I looked at him, and I stood up from behind my desk, and I reached across my desk to shake his hand. I says, absolutely, welcome aboard. I didn't have to do an interview. This guy's reputation preceded him. I had known him. He's the guy that talked me into it. And if it hadn't been for him doing that, you and I wouldn't be having this interview. So I got to do something for him.
But he greeted many people, thousands and thousands of Flintstones as they got off the airplanes, including myself, as he stood there at that podium when you walk through those sliding doors. Levester Crosland was a good man. He's now passed away. He was a legend in Flint. Thank you, Chris. We have to run. I appreciate your time. So you all have a good day. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye for now.